around the theme of generations of peace. And the question that Flavio is asking is, what are the multiple faces of peace? And what you might think about as others are coming in is, does peace have a face? If so, what kind of face is it? Is it a smiling face? Does it have all the features of a face that you might think? Does it allow for gaze, the kind of thing that we see about? And what is the meaning of bringing a metaphor like that? So the way this is going to work, I'm not sure how many people we will have. Flavio will give a short presentation, complete with a couple of PowerPoint slides. He's a very good graphic artist. And Flavio also has a background in whole systems design, I should point out. So there's a large design element to this. And what we would like to do is to have this session itself follow in process the same kind of ideas that Flavio was talking about. So one of the ideas of the World Café is the notion of cross-pollination, and to make this as participatory as possible. So when Flavio is done, we'll open this up, no breakout rooms this evening or this morning, depending upon where you are, but we'll open this up for conversation. We ask you to, because two main design principles of the cafe are asking questions that matter. So make sure that you're asking a question, not giving a speech like I'm giving right now, violating my own rules, but then also setting the context. So tell us just a little bit about where you are and where your question is coming from. Flavio, my friend, we're all yours right now.
So thank you for all your presences here, and I hope you all feeling well, and I welcome you with all my heart, and I hope and I trust that we are going to have a good moment here with everybody. As Fred said, you know, it's a conversational moment. I know that we don't have all the time in the world to stay here, you know, like for several days talking, but at the same time, I'd like to see somehow your perspective through what you would like to ask as I speak. And not that I'm putting myself the one, but just to interact through the ways that Fred said. I don't know if you know the World Café. The World Café is a very interesting process of gathering, you know, bringing people together around tables, small groups that you can have 4 tables, 100 tables, you know, 150 tables. You can have hundreds of people talking at the same time in small groups, and then you cross-pollinate and, you know, travel from one place to another and tell your stories. And so the more you travel, the meaningful the conversation becomes. And this is what I'd like to tell you, as I was assigned to design a peace project in Ceará, one of the poorest states of Brazil, with 800 million inhabitants. And so I was asked to design a program for the whole education, high school system, which is in public system, which encompasses a little more than 700 high schools. Now it's about 850. It's been a while, 6 years since I left. It's a very progressive state now, even though there's a lot of difficulties there. In the beginning, they were reacting, you know, there was a outcry from the public that people needed to fight violence, you know. And they thought, bring the police, you know, locking down the schools, you know, and, you know, all that defensive posture or even aggressive or oppressive posture would diminish the violence. And fortunately, you know, people understood that we should work from the place of peace, not from the place of reacting against violence. And so our motto, our word, we started with peace for peace, or the peace that comes from the state of peace. even if for some people it's just an ideal, good for them. But for some people, really meant a lot. So we didn't need to deal with what was not peace in the very beginning, without not taking for granted the problems, but at the same time, we are starting from a good place, a higher place than the problems. So we had a situation problematic, but we could have a larger solution as long as we talked about them. And so we started working with several groups, different groups, dealing what we called peace cafes, from 30 people to 850 people. During 2 months, we asked them, what's peace? What's peace made of? And what is it to be in peace? And all of that to reach that, what Fred said regarding a metaphor, which became a very powerful question, a generative metaphor. What's the face of peace? But these very 3 questions brought so many different answers that we are noticed. When I say we, because we can't do this by ourselves. Even though I was the main designer, we had a team. And the more we had the cafes, the more people engaged, the more they became responsible for what was going on. So we had a general public in the beginning to hear from so many people, and people didn't want it to be protected as a result of the cafes. People wanted to be safe, which is very different paradigm from being protected to be safe. Safe means participating, making their lives safe, having better places to be mentally, emotionally, physically, in relationship. So after some time, as we approached directly the schools, we started to work with leadership, from directors or principals, as you say, you call it in English, the principals, the teachers, and the students, and then the families in the community. But basically, these 3 segments in the schools represented a lot, because they all had their specific leadership, their specific relationships. And as we crossed them all together, bringing them all together, sometimes separately in terms of groups, different groups, we had like a chain that spread in the school, in the regional, what they call the school district, and across the state. Making the story short, it took like 4 years to get that done. And it's still happening. After 6 years, it's still happening. It became a public policy for the state. We call their Ceará Pacífico, which means Ceará peaceful, or peaceful Ceará, which has lots of projects that sustain other public policies to make this happen across the whole state, not only within the school system anymore, but also through other systems in cooperation with the schools. Because we found that the schools are the places where most people, we consider vulnerable, or the children, adolescents, are present every day from Monday to Friday, the same day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, they're all always there. So it's a great laboratory to engage in, to work with. And so after some time, we asked them to evaluate themselves. And out of 704 schools, 76% of the schools became certified because they decided to plan peace as daily activity systematically, not only as a discipline or as an occasional event or a program or something that someone, a hero in the school, would take charge. It was for all students, for all teachers, for all administration, for the cook, for the doorman or the doorwoman, and everybody, the cleaning person, everybody. So what I'm telling you is something that we didn't expect that much, but the power of having conversations and believing that we are not as asked this question before today in another session. Peace and love is a cliche, right? We heard that from the 60s, especially, peace and love. And people are afraid of speaking about that because it, doesn't sound well. But are we made of something different than peace and love? Are we made of something else? I mean, not besides that, but not of that. Because when we presented the process of conversation where people learned how to talk about things that matter to them and self-organize around the issues that they really cared for, it worked so fast that we all learned, including the World Café learned, because it became a learning system more than before, because it used to be and still is, but it became more complex. It became more effective as we developed across the regions, across the state, and had and still have the results. So the story is very long. I don't want to get you tired about that. Probably there's lots of observations that would like to make, or questions that would like for me to clarify. And that, I think, would be much more interesting to engage in that way than to tell you so many details. Because, for example, when you, I don't know how many of you are educators, teachers, faculty in universities. And normally we assign people to do things. And when people engage, a virtual circle happens where people assign themselves and agreements are made. People talk about networks, right? Networks. What I understand, networks is a structure of commitments, because once people want to commit to that. And because of those committed people, we had committed action that thrived throughout the system, school system. So I'm open to talk to you, whatever you would like to know or clarify. And please, as you know me well, Fred, if you like to add stuff, because I know that my English isn't that good.
Your English is fine, and it's better than mine. But so Flavio, in terms of the flow of this session, there is a question that came in from Josie, if I pronounced your name right. And I don't know for the flow if you would like me to read the question, or Josie, you can just ask the question directly, because in terms of setting the context, her question is about that, precisely that. So go ahead, Josie.
Yeah.
You just have to take yourself off mute. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Very good to be here. I'm glad to see everyone. Flavio, thank you so much for that story. I apologize for being just a couple of minutes late. One of the questions that I had, you were talking about these peace cafes, and I was curious, how do those get started, and how do you determine what the topics are that you'll discuss at these peace cafes? And are they, if there are multiples, is it just, does each cafe come up with their own set of questions?
Okay. Fred, when he introduced me, he spoke about my work with using Paulo Freire, applying Paulo Freire work. I don't know if you know him or read about him. He's a Brazilian educator. He's more known outside Brazil than in Brazil. Okay, and so he brought what he called a critical thinking or conscientization, which is becoming aware progressively of the reality that you are surrounded and you co-create as you are in dialogue, with others. So that he brought something, because he became famous because one of the literacy program for the farmers in Brazil, poor farmers, and he applied what he called thematic mapping, which is what are the themes there are living in the inside people, in their mind, in their which represents their expectations, their visions, their history that could emerge in interaction. So that's what we did in the very beginning when we heard about 3,200 people in several cafes in the very beginning. We heard them, and the words, the way that the languaging, speaking of Maturana, made the difference. Not only the word itself, but the way they languaged it, the way they expressed what was behind, in front, around, inside and outside the words that they express. That's why, out of 3,200 people that we heard in the very beginning during 2 months, we had 525 different, unique representations of what they understood about what's peace, what it's made of, and what is it to be in peace or in the presence of peace. So that helped us to really have a broader understanding, or like a comprehensive, I would say, perspective, and in living the paradox of having a comprehensive focus, so that we could navigate to the left, to the right, to the front, step back a little bit to really help people to talk their own language, not my language, right? Nobody wanted to colonize anybody except for decolonizing and let them be who they were. And that's why it became, pretty much customized for themselves.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
That's a great question, Josie. And we have a question from Nick, who, he may not tell you this, but he actually lived in Brazil for about 10 years. So it's possible the question will be in Portuguese. I'm not sure. Go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
Bye, Nick.
We'll have to talk some other time in Portuguese.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear more about the project. So just to clarify, so the outcome, well, one, I guess when you started this, did you expect to have an outcome beyond just discussion? And then am I understanding that correctly, that the outcome of these cafes were community actions or community policies and decisions and activities?
Yeah, well, I counted on several consultants with different, specializing in different areas. Like, for example, it's very common. Like, for example, I'm starting a new project in the state of Paraná. I believe you've been there, or at least it exists, with some schools, 25 schools now. And the World Café serves for what we call situational diagnosis, also to see what's going on, what do you have, right? And sometimes you'll find, active several projects, programs, initiatives in the curriculum that have, I say, substantive affinities. They match somehow, but they don't communicate. So using the World Café to allow them people to communicate about the things that need to communicate is a big thing, because then you work with consultancy to make a new design, to simplify the path, you know, to bring things together, or to at least to make new bridges so that they can complement and open up, free up some space, you know, because sometimes they compete with each other. This is one of the activities. Also is to stimulate or like, for example, partners who, for example, a newspaper, they always, they had a foundation, for just an example, and they came to us and to the State Department of Education of Ceará, willing to develop human rights and culture peace project at from distance learning, okay? And they we call in Brazil, I think in English too, someone say, would you like to make a lemonade with 2 lemons? I say, yeah. So this is the deal. They have, there's the money, and there's the will, and there's the partnership. Let's do it. So 130,000 people were benefited from that. See, and no cost for the project, you know. So because it attracts and shows, it kind of illuminates new spaces of participation, because you allow for change without hurting, you know, because people feel fine they're participating, you know. Nobody, I mean, loses, right, in these things. Or if one project shrinks, it's because the other one is getting stronger, until one will simulate the smaller, or vice versa, you know. So it's a lot of work. I used to say, to make peace may be easier than to organize peace, because organize peace it takes a lot of, I don't know how to make peace. I know how to organize the space.
I was planning on asking
you.
I think so, and I was planning on asking later about, you know, I've heard a lot about, you know, participatory democracy and community budgeting in Brazil, and it sounds like this program helped bring all those together and coordinate and learn about them and share, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, it does, you know, like public hearing, for example. What we did in the very beginning of the project was public hearing. We asked people, invited, you know, like that was an open invitation. We didn't say you know, come whoever. The more diverse, the better. And so it worked. Unfortunately, since we're using a lot of internet now in Brazil, people are doing public hearing in the internet. So the disenfranchised people don't participate. You know, it's not an interaction. You work just by yourself. It's not representative. But for example, people, but you can do a lot of stuff with the World Café. I'm sure, you know, from my own experience and seeing the others working with.
So,
thank you.
Flavio, I have a question. Just something that I think you can expand on, because participation is such an important part of what it is that you're doing. And yet in different cultures, even within, say, a given language, we have very many different meanings of participation. Participation can be, I tell you, I'm going to do this. Is this okay? And you say yes. And I say, okay. Flavio participated with me in designing this session, right? But I think you brought forth a very different, a much more richly sort of including ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what this session is about, but a much deeper sense of participation. At the same time, there is no guarantee that that could be brought forth, right? You could have people at the cafe and they might say, Fred, what's Fred doing here? You know. So I mean, it would be interesting to know how to say a little bit more about how you set the context of how your deep notion of participation actually was so central to what you did.
Well, I think we're talking about, if you're talking about whole systems design, I mean, my simple way of talking about whole system design is one whole within another whole, several parts. So when I say participation, it's the parts in action, bringing a whole together. So we need to establish some rules for the relationship within in the cafe. Be prepared for the context in which people are going to have equitable equity, right? Inclusion in diversity as much as we can. And so when we talk on the beginning of the cafe, for example, next week, we're going to have from those new 25 schools, we're going to have the director, which is the principal, a teacher, a pedagogue, which is do the orientation or pedagogical orientations in schools, and a student at least. So how can we do that without agreeing upon a few rules of conviviality that we call? Like, for example, nobody is better than anyone. Nobody knows everything. Everybody has something to teach, and we are all unique. If we all agree on this, and have a question that don't confront people, or people feel confronted by the question and feel like, uh-oh, I'm in the hot spot here. Things flow well. Things flow well, especially when we cross-pollinate, when people travel from one table to the other, and people start to feel empowered by the process, not by someone. Because, for example, institutionally speaking, when you talk about, like, for example, Paulo Freire, he brought the paradox of dealing with authority and autonomy. For example, I have the authority to run a cafe, but I have to design something and coordinate something that allows for as much autonomy possible that is possible. For example, when people ask me, what is to empowerment? What is empowerment? And because normally it's a loaded word. People think like, okay, like you said, we will participate, which means I'm letting you participate, right? And so empowerment in an establishment like a school or school system or somewhere else is when we, as responsible for that environment, like a director or coordinator, designer, whoever who has the authority to run that place, recognize that pre-existing power that each person has and provide the conditions so that power can be exerted the best way possible. So in a World Café, it allows the space, as you know, for that to happen, as long as we're sincere and don't try to manipulate and find and predict the score before it does. It happens. So bringing the pieces together, because I think it's a matter of perception. I thinking about Bateson. When I first time I heard of Bateson and read something about Bateson, Gregory Bateson, it felt like this thing about bringing the pieces together is a matter of perception. The things are already together, but we need to perceive all of it at once so that we go to another level learning, so that we can be wiser together.
And wiser together is one of the themes. So we have a question from Amsterdam, from Rick, who's his hands up. Rick, go ahead.
Rick.
Hi, everyone. Flavio, and all of you. When you talk about we all have something unique to say, we don't know everything. I know the both of us had talks in Santa Barbara, also around World Café and improv, theater, music. in my work around what's happening in music, sometimes it's helping people to understand that they have so much to say, but they don't know yet. So you cannot already, you don't have to prepare for your wisdom, because it might emerge from a stage that has been set by some wise people who know how all these dynamics might work. So what is your experience with this?
Oh, well, you mean with music or in general?
More like the design for emergence thing. That for instance, when I'm trying to help well, musicians, but also other people around conversations to get to this, then it is like an aha moment where they think, okay, so if we are co-creating this stage, well, we can trust each other and invite each other to think out loud and don't break everything down after the first sentence. That give it some time, and in 5 melodies something emerges and you think, where is this coming from?
Yeah, there is a paper that I wrote. I mean, Fred and Juanita Brown, who's one of the co-creators of the World Café, I wrote with them about the World Café, especially as an action research setting. And we talk about the soundscape, you know. I was going to talk about this earlier today because, I mean, it feels like there's a soundtrack happening, you know, the vibration. Everybody feels it. Sometimes we don't hear it, but you sense it. And, you know, emerging. Yeah, I wrote a paper in an issue of cybernetics and human knowing, still to be available, not available yet. It's designing for emergence, creating living networks of conversation grounded in love. Because for Humberto Maturana, you know, the biology of love, you know, and you know, and the conversations that he brought, you know, how these things get together, the ontology of conversing and the biology of love, they're, you know, like two entities of one being in nature. And so he brought that to the social systems, how to understand who we are. And one of the things they had the courage to say is that the love is not the result of our interactions, it's the origin. Because to accept the other as legitimate, we need to have a little bit of love. That he named it emotioning, a higher level of emotioning. And so when we bring all these qualities together, you know, whatever emerges, you know, will be beautiful. Will be beautiful. I know that when we're talking about conflict, you know, what took me to Ceará before the peace project was a conflict resolution session for 120 people, 60 against 60 people, the government and the labor union of the teachers. And they are about to go to strike, and they asked me to talk. And I asked them to reflect on the first page of the main newspaper, what they would like to see in 5 years, the headlights and headlines, right? And and so each group, large group, opted for one newspaper, right? The one they think it was more like in their side. And so 60 people on each side, they were not together at all. They didn't share any table. So I asked them to move around, then move around again until they exhausted the possibility of not crossing the bridge. And I saw their faces surprised, they wrote mostly the same things, even the same words. They wanted the same for their children and grandchildren. And then I say, okay, now that we agree in 90%, let's see the 10% that is the problem here, you know? So, but I didn't know how much would emerge. I really don't know. I bet that there was more in common than not, right? Because people are people. They have a problem, but they are not the problem, right? And so when we have that, you know, it works. And it was hard. When I got there, they didn't want to meet anymore. They had declared officially the strike. And they said, give us an opportunity to talk. And after 5 years, coincidentally or not, they met all the things that were different, you know, they're pending problems. So many stories to tell. But what I say, for example, my wife helps me a lot. She's my colleague, my loved partner, and she's my organization. I'm a more intuitive guy. And in the beginning, when I said, let's skip the round 2 of the cafe, and she would say, again, they're already answering the third one, you know? Say, let's find a shortcut because it emerged. Sometimes people get stuck, so you have to improvise. What I did with those people, 120 people, was improvisation. I didn't plan that. I planned something else in the airplane. When I got there, saw the situation, I changed. You know, that's why it requires a lot of humility and patience to get into that. See? I love you too.
So yeah, for everyone. So as you might be guessing, I mean, Flavio actually does have some PowerPoint slides that we thought if there are no questions, he would be able to present. But please feel free to ask questions about other aspects of what he did or thoughts that you have that might connect. So think of Flavio as your consultant also. Thoughts that might connect with difficult situations in which you're involved right now. And we are all in so many difficult situations. As a lead into that though, Flavio, I don't believe no one else has a question, but so maybe my asking questions is getting to it. Yeah, Shosi, go ahead. I get a chance to talk to Flavio all the time.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just have a comment. And, you know, I was thinking about just again, what you were talking about with these peace cafes and, you know, kind of how you initiate that dialogue. It really is around things that aren't necessarily that controversial, but meaningful to people. And that establishes that foundation of trust that then allows you to have some of those more maybe conversations that are a little bit more difficult to have. I've just been thinking about this a lot. I'm participating, I don't know if you're familiar with John Maxwell, but he's got this effort going on called Change Your World, and it's around values, and it's really about everybody has a foundation of values, right? And those are, it's not to make judgments on anybody, it's for people to be able to talk about what that value means to them. And I think that's what helps to connect people and create that space of safety where they do feel like they can say something that they're not going to be judged on, but really to make it a more meaningful conversation. So anyway, thank you so much for that. It came to my mind, and I wanted to share that was kind of a thought I was having. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Someone made a question. I don't know where. I don't know.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to ask your question, or I can read it?
Sure. Just a clarifying question, Flavio. What was your background or profession that led to this work that you did?
Okay. I always liked to be with people. This comes from the family, you know. My parents always took us to do things with people. support people. It's a long story, but I first thing is vocation. The voice speaking. Like you need to find your way to do that. So after many years, trying to save the world and out of the cafezinho. You know what that means, right? Out of the cafezinho is the coffee time when you in the break to save the world in the break. Okay, and then you have a serious talk when you're drinking coffee. Like that's how, more or less, this is how the World Café started. People start talking seriously at ease when they feel comfortable to discuss about the day before, where they have a serious conversation and consultation moment with Juanita and David. And then after that, I decided to go to Seattle in 1996 to study, and I had to start something to finish my BA because completion for a year, and then related to human and organization development because of my background, professional. And then I did a master's in whole system design, having the world, having peace as a case. It was called a whole system design approach to peace, a whole system approach to peace, a case for design. And then I started to dedicate most of my time to that. I was a teacher, English teacher in Brazil, and then I decided to start my consultation in the 90s, I think, 90 something. And after many years, because I felt that peace is, for me, I understand as a systemic wholeness, equivalent to systemic wholeness. Is a concept that goes through not only what is inside us, but how we relate to things and how things affect us, And then I decided to go to fielding, following a recommendation of Juanita Brown. She asked me I was about to start the peace project in Fortaleza, and she asked me to study more, see how you can do with the World Café. Because in Latin American countries, when a girl turns 15, she's presented to society as a young woman. And that's what's happening with the World Café. She said, this girl is now turned 15 and she's too smart. We don't know what she wants. What's her future? Would you like to try and see what happens and test because we experimented the living principles, we lived them. Will they survive the project with almost 500,000 students? I said, let's see. So this is how I've been striving and trying to survive as a consultant, getting more experience. And for this reason, I was selected by UNESCO to another round of cooperation recently.
Yeah, so Flavio, you didn't mention that you were also a professional tennis player.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I mentioned that because one of the things that emerges so clearly, I mean, your idea of design for emergence is so powerful, but that it also comes out of recognizing that, in terms of, we have several architects and designers on this call, by the way, so they may have some questions too. I recognize them. But that in allowing for design for emergence, you very often bring a lot of things that might seem totally discontinuous with what is going on. So it's not a linear process, but something from a previous life might show up and say, this presents itself as an interesting metaphor. And I mention that because one of the things that I talk about your work as so energizing is how in your dissertation you chose to, the last chapter was not a conclusion. So the last chapter actually was, I forget the exact title, but something like, this is not the baggage claim, this is the boarding gate.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could say a little bit more, not only about what that means, but how it is that you actually thought about that, because so often we think of conclusion, okay, we'll put a little ribbon around this, we're done with it, and we move on to something else. But to allow for continuity from one domain to another, which is also what you're doing from your previous UNESCO project to the current one. So maybe say a little bit about where that metaphor came from, the importance of metaphor, and how can we join you at the boarding gate for the next flight?
Yeah, yeah. It's a funny thing because I don't own the process. You know, I just participate as long as people allow me to participate. You know, and the funny thing is that most people, you know that better than anybody in this group, but it's not a secret. I had, because of the World Café, I have more than 10,000 co-researchers, right? All the people who helped me to lead. That's why, you know, I always say we. So, and most people don't even remember or know my name, you know, but they remember the lesson. They are organized for themselves. Speaking of values, like Josie spoke, you know, if I had to tell them what the values should be in the project, I would send them a manual. But when you listen to people, and it becomes so obvious that people agree on what they're not talking about what Flavio is doing. So that's why, you know, whenever this, so it's a flow. It's not something that ends with my participation. Like, for example, the other day I brought a new translation to that. Someone asked, "Oh, but you're going to stay here only for the pilot project? What about the rest?" I don't know. I don't know if this is going to work, and I don't know if I'm going to be hired for the continuation. But what I would like to leave by the road is a nice suitcase with a handle to the top, so if someone comes, can carry forward. You know, that's the point. It's not mine. So as I finished one of the parts of in the dissertation, I wrote something like, I'm feeling like a hollow bamboo with empty hands. You know, it's not heavy because I don't own that. We do, right? That's the point.
Well, I wonder if we might do something totally weird and show us the PowerPoint slides that you prepared.
Say again?
I wonder if, I mean, you did prepare some slides. If my questions so I wonder if you might just go through them just to give a sense of what it was that you were going to talk about, if no one had any questions, which I knew wasn't going to happen.
I can't hear you well. Can you say again, please?
I was just inviting you to share the slides that you had prepared, if you have some.
Oh no, I didn't.
Oh, okay, it makes it easier then.
I didn't want it to be in the place of having the slides.
Okay.
You know, unless you all had. I think this is the World Café, right? I mean, Paulo Freire used to say, each head is a world, you know, and my head isn't better than anybody. It would look fancier, but I promise that if you like to have another moment that say, okay, bring slides, bring pictures, then I will do.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
But I didn't prepare.
I'm not a PowerPoint person myself anyway. Yeah, I wonder if others have questions or ideas of what Flavio is doing, or maybe what he will be doing with his next UNESCO project and how that might connect. with work that you're doing right now. I know we have a good group of people doing international work here too.
Yeah. Hi, Flavio, and
Elena,
thanks,
go ahead.
Fred,
Yeah.
for your last comment, because I was thinking precisely about the multinational teams that I work with in my international organization that I belong to. So, and that's interesting that once I participated in the World Café in this organization, and I would say it was not so smooth experience that probably it expected to be, let's say. And I think that one of the problems was just limited possibilities for dialogue, not because of language or like, I don't know, different topics for discussion, no, but first of all, because of the cultural differences, and sometimes people were unable to participate equally in a discussion, because for some of them, discussion should be led. For some of them, discussion should be done in some way, like wait a minute, what's our agenda today? So different tables were run differently by different people, representing different cultures and different environments within the organization, different departments, and so on. So my question, actually, it's kind of more requests to share any thoughts on that, probably from your experience. Could you share any advice here, how to organize better such event in the multicultural environment? So because peace and love and particular attitude and the sense of participation should be shared among people representing different cultures. How to organize this better? That's
Okay.
it. Thanks.
Yeah, I've had very interesting and funny situations. In the first place, I'd like to say the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, they had in Brazil the representative. He was a person from Peru, and he was very energetic and a very funny person. And so he asked me to do the strategic plan of the Brazilian headquarters here. And he invited everybody and said, you are convoked to do this. We're going to have a participatory meeting, and you will all have to participate. That was a challenge, you know. And I called him. I went to his office and said, but you are just one of them. Do we agree? This is my condition. You're just one of them. And it worked. And guess what? No country is allowed to have a strategic plan. This all comes from Rome, Italy. And he did his own, took to Italy and said, I bet my own position that this is better than what you're sending me. See, that was a transformation, but you have to be firm in the purpose, you know. And the principles that really hold the system together in a way that fits everybody. For example, first principle, set the context. See, tell people, there's no secret, it's pretty open. I don't have a hidden agenda. I have questions that might surprise you. Good for you, but good for me if it surprises you. But it's not a hidden agenda that I will catch you in the corner, you know, oh, you know, I don't know, now I have to say yes or no. I have to decide. The other thing is it's very tricky is the hospitable space. For some, it's hospitable, right? For example, if you bring like people from Brazil and United States or England or, you know, Netherlands, it's a challenge. Brazilians like to touch like Italians, right? And people want to keep a distance. And Fred knows very well that I consider the World Café setting might be like an Italian restaurant. It has to be noisy and cannot be tidy. It could be. Sometimes we do it, but momentarily we go changing the tables, you know, and shift things as people feel comfortable. It's like a maestro in an improvisation, song. And but these two things are very important, so that people know in advance that they are not there to tell others what it is to be done, right? So it's very important. Otherwise, don't call me. Okay, this is not going to work. But unfortunately, people do that. And one thing that one of my advisors at Fielding asked me to do is to research why it doesn't work. Because of those things. Because people try to, they know the results they want. No? So they find a way to, manipulate the process so that people will agree with him or her. But the beauty is when people leave knowing that me as a facilitator or organizer agree with them, because they become fluent in their feelings and mind, so they can carry their own stories to their families and make a difference in their communities. That's why it worked in Ceará and works in other places where I worked with the Ministry of the Environment in Brazil, where people far away come from many communities by the rivers, and then they they come back home with their own answers, not my answer, and they have a sense different because they have a sense of what the community needs, not what the whole world needs, like you have the separation, then North Hemisphere, South Hemisphere, all that stuff. So when you try to dribble all the ideology, for example, diversity, inclusion, we are all part of diversity, not some people, right? This is something that is there's a lot of ideology that is getting in the way of dialogue, right? It's diversity is everybody, all beings. Then we will see the differences. Then we include, right? Through equity. So this is something else. I don't want to teach you anything. I know you don't need that. But the answer is that's what I said before, okay?
Thank you for your comments. If I may add something, I think maybe the cultural setting plays pretty much important role in that process.
Oh yeah.
As I got from your comments, at least, because in the culture, and I was and I am actually within multiple cultures, multiple cultural environments. So I think that the culture is not so much about the inclusion, unfortunately, and equity. So I don't mean the United States, don't get me wrong, because I live in San Francisco, but I work with people from different cultures. And unfortunately, it's not understood everybody. These terms, equity and inclusion, understood differently by different people from different countries.
Yeah.
For some people from some countries, equity is like, okay, you're a woman, we allow you to speak. This is about equity.
I understand.
And they think that's we are so proud of being there at that position. So I mean, maybe I took a long time with my questions, sorry for that, but I think everybody can meet such like differences in terms of like different cultural expectations, what I'm trying to say actually. So I think that it's important to include, if you design this such space, you should think about this cultural aspects.
Yeah, I forgot to say something, if I may. I don't know how to say it like in a very nice way. I'm going to say it slowly. Rotary Club, right? You understand what it is? Okay. This person who became a friend of mine, who was invited to organize a World Café in a Rotary Club convention in Brazil. And when she faced the complexity of many countries, many countries, she got scared. She said she had been in 2 cafes before, and she's friends with Juanita, and Juanita said, talk to Flavio. He has the courage. And I was there in Sao Paulo, and there were people representing 86 countries. You can imagine. What we can do is that's why, see, when I started talking about peace, let's start from a higher ground where people will look up, not about here, the stomach, the guts, but let's see what we envision together. That's why what I proposed in the World Café, as it had been renewed, is to add some approaches that didn't exist blended with the World Café, like filtering, appreciative inquiry. There's some, but not as much as we can use now. Like, for example, if you harvesting was in the end, only at the end. If you find a way to ask in a way that you can harvest in each round, you can have a little harvesting, you will see if you're in the right direction, or if you have to reset the direction you should be going to honor all the presences. So if you go straight to one point, you're gonna leave people mad at you just because they're confronting them, or maybe you're leaving them behind. So you need to say, okay, if you say, who would like to eat banana? Okay, those who like banana. What about the other ones? Well, we'll starve, right? So it's a long conversation. This is a long conversation about multicultural perspectives, You can imagine in a universe where you find hundreds of thousands of kids with their families, with their communities, multi-generational, multicultural, and several things. It's a very humbling situation, right? That's why through humility comes wisdom, That's what I got from that.
Thank you. Thank you, Flavio.
I thank you.
So Flavio, just right. Another question that I have that comes from, thanks so much, Elena, for your sort of deeply felt and very energizing question. Building on that, I mean, one of the things that I think is also important in your work and shows up in terms of really looking at the multiple faces of peace, interculturally, cross-culturally, is that, to design a cafe, you have to assume that there's some shared ideas about something, like what makes a good conversation or what makes a good dialogue if you're inviting people to have a good conversation. At the same time, challenging yourself to say, maybe my idea of what a good conversation is not what Elena's is, or is not what Rick's is, or is not what Nick's is, or is not what Gail's is. And how, so looking at design for emergence, how you recognize that this isn't, people are having a good conversation, but to Fred, a good conversation means he talks and other people listen. Well, that's not my idea of a good conversation. So how do you build this in as so the process that you're inviting people into is also part of the content of what you're doing with the multiple faces of peace?
Well, I think one thing, it depends on the context, who you're talking with, who you, or what situation you're dealing with, right? Problematic situations are a little more challenging than the ones who are, lighter. But in general, what I try to apply, like I'm gonna give you an example, right? Recently, I had a group of about 30 people. I was introducing this new project. They're all they work with the teachers. They call like tutors that help the pedagogical part in the schools they supervise or help. And I wanted them to be, working with this, resignify the work through the peacemaking process. And then most of them I never met. I just said hi. I've been here for a month, right? Most of them I never met. And I decided to work with the pace of peace, right? First of all, I set up video with the beauty of pollination. It's a nice movie. How nature works, and people commented. I asked, "Is there a biology teacher here? Can you help me with the concept of pollination?" I started talking about cross-pollination and blah, 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 and say, okay, let's talk about a few things that I think it's of your interest. And I asked, for you, what's the face of peace for you? So they listed, talked, they presented a few people, they talked about it. And then I said, okay, then they changed their places. And I asked, for you, being the school, now, you are the school. When you look at the mirror, what's the face of peace that you see? See? Then you turn the mirror around, right? Something like that. And that was very surprising because I was asking the very same question, but I was amplifying, the spectrum of the reflection. And then I said, and they talked and talked and talked. And then I said, okay, now, what is it possible now that hasn't been before for you to make this face of peace even better, even more beautiful and happier? So they started to address things that they already do, and in a more beautiful way, more that resonate with their ideals, not with their obligations. This is something that Maturana says about, relationship cannot be because of obligation. People it's not a duty. It's it's a flow, right? And so it helped to reflect, the things that, even if you're involved about this writing, it's not only about reflecting on and what you, in the action of what you're doing, right? It's reflecting in the interaction. So you start seeing it's a multifaceted observation without knowing. You're looking from several angles, the very same reality. And suddenly you start, relaxing that because you feel more empowered to go on with the conversation. Nobody's telling you that you're dumb. That's my sense. So it's always something that I think it has to do with the design questions, which comes before the cafe. The design questions: what is at stake? What is there a problem there? Is there an obstacle that needs to be recognized? Is there things that are easier now? The conditions. And then make the question accordingly. Like, for example, working with judges. I worked with judges, in Brazil a few times, and they're pretty bad as managers, but they think they're the bosses. They have lots of people working for them. So they recognize internally they are incompetent. I can imagine if I ask them, why are you so incompetent? Do you know? But if you ask, what is excellence in management? You bring people to look up. even if they lying to each other, they were telling what is right, what they would like to be, right? And start to reflect on what is the present moment of their life, where they are, and what they can become. You know, I mean, the thing about Bates, about Maturana, about drifting, you know, you feel like you start, your senses start to pursue a better future, vision of a better future, without, you know, being told. This is it.
Yeah, Rick, thanks.
Yeah, this what resonates here with me is I just was thinking of a World Café session I was involved in some years ago, and then something happened there that was for me connecting also with design, but from a different perspective, like how people framed the World Café itself. So what I remember, it was a wonderful session, and it was about bringing people together from one city in Holland around different challenges and stuff. But they presented it in a way like, and now, folks, we're going to do something new and something surprising and something really exotic. And now we got this big gymnastic hall, and we got these tables, and now and I was supposed to do something. I was just part of the program. I was just hired. And then they were doing that thing, and it was really noisy, and all kind of things happened. But then at the end, they said, wow, this was a really great experience. I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe we'll see you another time at the World Café, but for now, back to business, folks. So I thought this is really interesting. Because when you talk about emergence, you talk about, when people start to talk about something, the cool thing with emergence is it takes time, you know. And if you talk about whole systems, it takes a lot of time. So some things might emerge in a month, in 2 months, little sparks coming up, you know. But when there's not a reframing about how that type of learning works, then people expect some instant gratification and some results at the end. And now we solve this problem. So that's something that I experience a lot around my own work around dialogic communication, stuff like that. When you really get into the emergent thing, then people sometimes irrationally, they take you serious. They think, oh yeah, that's really cool. But somehow they have to explain to the boss that they solved these problems, or it has some tangible results right now. And somehow you cannot come back to this moment where you said, is it all about measurement or tangibles? So, and this is maybe cultural. Maybe it's the Dutch way of, we're open to all kinds of things, but quite easily we switch back to, and now back to business, folks, and then back to writing things down and calculating things.
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing that there's a lot of criticism, well, there was a lot of criticism about the World Café not being useful for decision-making processes. There was, you know, that's why I was, you know, intrigued about how we could add, you know, in the flow, not like stop the cafe, now start something else. This is what I saw and even done, you know, years ago. And one thing that it's important, no, you don't have to convince anybody that they have to be in the same, doing the same as everybody else. Because there is an article written by Juanita, I don't remember, I think Tan, I think her name.
Samantha Tan, yeah.
Samantha Tan. I think both wrote the World Café as a metaphor, like a cafe itself. And observe a cafe. People go there once a week. People be there, don't talk to anybody. People talk to everybody. People drink different ways of preparing a cafe. You know, people eat, people don't eat. People stay longer than the others, you know. So this is human nature. You won't change it. What you have to find a way to be creative and improvise in a way that sometimes it's not working one way. So have to be prepared to change. And perhaps, oh, this is not working for some people here. Let's see, you know, adapt. right?
Yeah, but what I think is very important that people realize when you think about raising consciousness, that people are getting conscious of a certain quality of thinking that leads to
Yeah.
a different type of decision making that is much, much more wiser and complex and sophisticated than what we normally tend to do. So when you were working with improvising musicians, at a certain moment, they sense what it is to be improvising, and they sense, wow, I don't know if I'm a better musician, I can come up with cooler licks right now, but I'm improvising. It's all different in a way. But then, and then you realize the value of that, because if you ask an improvising musician, many of them, can you play this, maybe not reading the score, but this fixed thing, it's not a problem at all. But you can choose, you can play around it, you can bend it, you can play with, but it's like, you first have to justify that there is a different way of engaging in stuff, you know, around hardcore business things, like really decision making. It's utterly weird that it's based on only rational stuff, that we all know that. But coming up with the alternative, still, it's still a challenge to take it away from this exotic alternative to the real thing.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of how you contract with people. You know, you cannot. One thing that I learned, you know, I used the word facilitate. Then I said organize, coordinate. Because one thing that I learned from my whole system design mentor in Seattle was, if you want to facilitate, or if you want to be a facilitator, you feel like you're superior. If you feel like you're just doing something nicer from what you're getting as someone who's contracting, telling you, okay, I like this, right? This is what's happening with design thinking, right? Like an embellishment of something that already exists. Sometimes, most of the times work, but sometimes you're just an artist. You're not designer.
Yep.
Right. That's the difference of being a designer. A designer is the one who will feel what the deepest longing of your clients. What is in there? So that will emerge, not my ideas or just the surface of the top of their heads. So this is something that you develop, you know, throughout time. It's a great adventure that it never ends.
I'm asking this because as you know, I love your work, but it's sometimes hard work to think about. Okay, we all have these beautiful ideas, but it might be. I think it should be so easy, in all the millions of things that are happening around the world to improve our ways of working, to bring it in as an alternative. But somehow it doesn't work, and I'm really curious about why it doesn't work and why can we ease it up a bit, because the stuff is already here and it's so wonderful. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I worked with UNICEF a couple of times. Yeah, there was a time they asked us to evaluate a program they have for the children, and they call the Seal of the Children, the child. And many municipalities in Brazil have like a brand or a seal, an acknowledgement of their work, and it involves several people, the mayor, several people from different departments, and one person from UNICEF in each municipality. And they asked me to bring people together to do an assessment of their own performance, right? Self-evaluation. We had 3 cafes. One of them was in the state of Ceará, 550 people, 110 tables. One of the things that the beauty of the World Café, each hour meant hours of conversation, because 110 tables. And at the end, we had, you know, you're talking about tangible results. We had assessment, we had a plan of improvement that was not requested, and also some criticism, I mean, positive recommendations to better the UNICEF's methodology. In this very same time, they granted us to talk. you know, and people ate a lot, laughed a lot. And and I had a technical report, thick, with several things written, you know, regarding these three outcomes. They asked me just one. They paid me for one, you know, and I could deliver much more than that. It's not just because I'm good, because the process, you know, allows for creativity and productivity and effectiveness. Okay.
So, I mean, one of the things that you're raising, we do need to wrap up in a few minutes. And one of the things you're raising, it comes out of Rick's question. I had a similar experience where we did this wonderful cafe at a museum, the Museum of Science and Industry, trying to bring new voices into thinking about what a museum might be for the community. And we had the board, the chairman of the board there, and we intentionally did it in a space that was a play space, thinking that this is not a boardroom, they'll play differently. And it was a fantastic conversation. At the end, everyone said, this is the best meeting that we've had forever. We have to, you know, continue this conversation. And then the chairman of the board got up and said, yes, this was a great conversation. Now let's get down to business. And completely, you know, putting a bracket around what had happened in the cafe. So the question is how to establish some continuity from what emerges, which is what all your work is about, and not have the learning about dialogue, learning about the many faces of peace confined to those sessions, but moving outward. And this is where your work with Maturana's work becomes important. So maybe some final thoughts about that. Oh, I do have to add, by the way, that you mentioned your chapter on design for emergence in this special issue, the volume about Maturana, and that actually went to press today.
Oh.
So if anyone is interested in getting a copy of Flavio's piece, you can write to him or to me, and you will have it. It'll be out in the press pretty soon. Anyway, I asked you a question, and then I took it in a different direction, which is, you know, like I got on the wrong plane with your baggage or something like that, taking your metaphor in the wrong direction.
I tried to remember a question. I was so excited about the book. Well, I'm a phenomenologist. What is it? Is it? Say it for me.
Phenomenologist?
Yes, thank you. I mean, this keeps me in the present most of the time, which is good, you know. So I think I'm sure, you know, and one thing that helps a lot, and when you're organizing, you know, designing a cafe, and have these expectations, like kind of and organizational structured expectations and goals, etc., is use your intuition. You know, Paulo Freire used to say, we can make the world beautiful or ugly, and this is what I call the spiritualization of the world, or meaning our senses, include our senses in what we do. And we have, like, as I mentioned to Jane, when you're talking from Oslo a few years ago, and a student asked me, how do you assess what you do? And they say, can you see my chest from where you are in the screen? I was speaking from the city. Look at here, see? Look at here, right? To my chest. Use your heart as a compass. It's not only your mind. Using our mind is what we do most of the time, is to have a sense of where you are, right? We use our feelings, you know, in many ways. Like Maturana said, even a cockroach has emotions. You know, it sees it and runs away, right? But we have other emotions that are noble and can be applied in our assessment around what your clients' expectations are, and align that. We're not trying to save the world here. It's just to make it more beautiful, right? More effective. If you're talking about airplanes or guitars or couches, right? Cars, but at the same time, it can be a meaningful journey, or at least more meaningful journey.
And I think the journey is what we need. I did want to acknowledge Hillary, who is our host and has been participating in this session with some wonderful comments. And Hillary, maybe, I know we have a hard stop a minute ago, right? But maybe
No.
had some thoughts. Yeah.
I was going to say we're okay because we can go over because I have the Zoom host control. So we have a couple more minutes here. There's nothing immediately after. Flavio, I have to say, even though I haven't been on camera the whole time, I'm working over here. There's so much that you've shared today that's resonated with me both personally and professionally. So first, I want to say thank you so much for your time. And of course, Fred, because you're the one that makes things happen for bringing Flavio here. But I wanted a couple of minutes, if it's okay, just to reflect on how this is making me think about my work in alumni relations. And when we're talking about culture, fielding has many cultures within it. And in alumni relations, in my work, different programming works for different alumni. Different schools prefer different types of engagement. And I'm constantly trying to, you talk about assessment. Rick, were you the one that was talking about metrics and engagement? That's my world. You know, how do you, right? It's how many people are showing up. So even for this conference, for example, what's the number? How many people are attending? How long are they attending? What are they attending? This, that, and the other thing. We also have the extension because this is a virtual space. And I was talking to Flavia and Fred before, is that this time right now, we're recording it, where when we're in person, we wouldn't have this. So this is a completely different type of engagement, right? So we're recording this, and so people can watch this later. So I was telling them this has legs until July, as long as this conference is open. So and now we're in a space when we're talking about engagement, and because of the pandemic has brought forth more opportunity to engage online, almost too much, to the point, I know I do the same thing, as if I see something and